And so I just want to say thank you all for coming again. This is now our third sanctuary sessions. Alice kicked us off last week, and then the following week we had Rhonda. And it's been really wonderful to have everyone here and to really listen to Alice and Rhonda guide us through these uncharted waters that we're now like learning to sail a little bit now that
yeah, people have a little skill now. Yeah.
So Alice has been amazing to work with, and we worked with each other now for about off and on for about 8 years. So
yeah, it started out in 2013, 2012, something like that. Yeah.
So thank you very much, Alice. I'll let you hit it from here.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. I have a little bit of a talk to give you, and then after that, probably about the 30 or 35-minute mark, if I do it right, I'll have time to take questions, and I'll be happy to answer questions on anything I might have said or you see on the PDF, or any aspect of mental health that you are curious about or have questions about. So I am a clinician. I see people on an ongoing basis. And one of the things I realized when I was asked to give this talk is that I have sort of a real-time understanding of what people are interested in, what's helping people. And so a few of the things that I've been talking to more than one client about is the notion of how to handle so much information, and also how to handle all of the relationships we're having to manage now. Oddly enough, people are more overwhelmed by people they know and friends and so on reaching out to them, and a lot of people are overwhelmed by the quantity of that as well. And a concept that I came up with has to do with where we're at right now, and I call it either information triage or relationship triage. And the very straightforward clinical notion of what triage is when you decide what person gets what care. How do you decide when there's a mass of people who are injured in all different ways, and you have a certain amount of ability to treat? You only have a certain amount of people who can care for a wide variety of people. How do you decide? And so there are very clear rules in figuring out who gets most care. And one of the ways they do it is by tagging people according to color. And so there's green, yellow, red, and black. A person who gets a green tag is someone who was in the fray, in the accident or whatever, but is okay. They don't need any direct or immediate care. They can handle themselves. They'll be all right. Someone who has a yellow tag is someone who was also there, but is injured, but in a way that they'll be okay as well without any immediate direct care. So they're injured, but they're going to be okay. Someone who has a red tag is injured, and they will recover if they get care. So they're the ones who are going to get the most care, but only because the person who's doing the assessment knows that if they give them that attention, they will get better. It's not a wasted effort. The people who have a black tag have been injured, but their injuries are beyond care at the moment. There's not anything the person can do to help them get better. At most, you can have someone care for them and basically hold their hand. But that's the extent of what can help them. Understanding that you can classify information like that. I have a few clients who are in the news business. They're writers, and they've talked to me about this fire hose of information that is coming at them. And one of the things I've encouraged them to do is figure out, okay, which information do you absolutely have to have? which is true, which is current, which is reliable, and that gets a green tag. And then rate the notifications you're getting, the websites you go to, the amount of time you spend, what social media you're on. Figure out where it gets ranked. Is it green? Is it yellow? Is it red? Is it black? And if it's black, then it's pretty toxic. It's not something you want to have to deal with, because it's a waste of energy and it draws what little ability you have to manage away. And particularly with social media, this is a really important thing to be able to do. And I also realize how difficult it is. Knowing that there are going to be people out there who are posting all the time, and you might have to say, you know, I'm not going to look at that. I'm going to unfollow them, or I'm going to hide them or mute them, or whatever the social media platform you're on does to keep you from seeing that might be the thing you have to do. And the same goes for relationships. There are people who have a way to manage that's healthy for you, that seems to be in sync with the way you're thinking, or that seems helpful. They're green. You're happy to hear from them. You can help them. They can help you. A yellow tagged relationship is going to be one that they're okay. You know, they're kind of struggling as well, but they're not going to be a real drain on your ability to be with them. They're not going to be hard to talk to. Someone who's got a red tag in the relationship arena might be someone who's having trouble. They might be having difficulty with the situation. They might be having difficulty emotionally or with their other relationships. But you get the sense that if you talk to them and help them, it will be worth it. It will be helpful to them. They just need you right then, and you can give them that care. There's going to be people who call you, who reach out to you, who are not helpful. And you can't help them. They might be reading everything they get, and they just have to tell everyone they talk to everything they know. And this is their way of coping. It's understood. It's important to remember, while you're making these assessments of people, you're not judging them. Everyone is managing this situation as best they can. Obviously, some people are going to be better able to handle it than others. One of the things that becomes important is to understand the way you handle it might be to say, not going to talk to them today, not going to pick up that call, not going to look on their feed. They are really toxic. They only make me feel worse after I've engaged with them, however that might be. And kind of going through your lists and going through your notifications and going through your emails and saying, okay, who do I want to talk to? How's that work? Red. Is that yellow? Are they black? Yeah, okay, I think that one's black. Yeah, have to acknowledge. Because one of the things that's important to realize is that everyone has a limited amount of care they can give to others and to yourself. And if you find yourself spending too much time with toxic relationships, with too much time with people who are negative, and obviously that negativity is coming from fear, nonetheless, it's contagious. And you don't want that to be the thing that you have to work at getting over, in addition to wherever you might be at. Another thing that has been something that people have been talking about a lot is creative people have this expectation, or there has been voiced an expectation, that now that we have this time, now that we're working, or now that we're not working at our day jobs or whatever it was that kept us busy or occupied, now we have the time to write the novel, make the movie, make the video, create the dance or whatever. And if we're not doing it, then, you know, we must be lazy or non-productive, or not really artists, or not really what we said we were, and so on. And there was fortunately, a really big backlash against that. It was interesting. The first couple of weeks of lockdown, you were seeing all these posts from people, oh, I'm doing this, oh, I'm doing that, blah, blah, blah. Well, one of the things that's important to remember is that everyone is going to manage stress differently. For some people, the way they manage stress is to make work. Okay, great. For other people, the way they manage stress is to make work and make sure that everybody knows they're making work. And for a lot of people, that second part is at least as important as the first one, because the way they're coping is to tell everyone that they're coping. In a way, and they might be trying to convince themselves. They might be hoping that if they do, then they will. However you want to take that, but understanding that that's not the way everyone's going to cope with this. And what happened was that people began to realize, well, you know, we are in a pandemic. There are people dying. Maybe I don't feel like making art right now. That's okay. It's understandable that this sort of situation is not going to be conducive for you. It may be that you aren't going to make the art that you thought you would, and you end up making something else. That's okay too. But being able to resist the sort of societal assumption that this is what you're supposed to be doing now is going to be really important also, to figure out how you want to manage your time and what's going to work for you. Excuse me. It's important to figure out what your reasons were for making work in the first place. I'm assuming that everyone here is in the arts in some way, shape, or form. And what can be helpful is to go back to the roots of it. You know, am I making work because my gallerist told me to? Am I making work because I'm supposed to have it done for that class? Or am I making work because, oh yeah, this is really going to help me right now, or this is really what I want to think about right now, or this is really going to give me pleasure? And trying to get back to that, trying to remember, oh, why do I do this in the first place, can be helpful in figuring out what kind of work you might be doing right now, or what's going to be helpful for you. And being able to pull apart why you do it and what sort of social influences or external duty is telling you you should. Figuring out what the difference between those two things can be really helpful. Another situation that I've heard about a lot is people in roommate situations and intimate partnerships or with family, and the family or the other person in the relationship has a really different approach to how they want to experience this quarantine, let's say. Some people have gone to one extreme where they, not only are they not talking to people, they're not leaving their house. They are doing everything possible to protect themselves. There's another end of the spectrum where people are like, yeah, okay, I can't have a party, but I'm gonna go out, I'm gonna go to the grocery store, I'm gonna do what I want, and I might even have a few people over or something. Everyone is gonna have a different level of comfort with what you can do, what you can't do, how you manage to clean things, how you manage to maintain a distance. And understanding that the person you're with, if their response to it is different than yours, you guys have to work that out, or understand that this is not going to work right now. By this time, people have pretty much figured this out. The first few weeks, I noticed that people were really trying to figure out how to handle why their friends weren't taking it seriously, how they were getting angry. People were realizing that they had to make choices and they didn't want to make those choices. But now it's pretty much come to the state of, okay, they have a different way of addressing this. I have to do something else. Either they leave or you find another place to shelter. But understanding that you don't want to judge people based on what kind of risk they're willing to accept and willing to live with. This is another aspect of personality. People don't always realize that risk is something that is according to what kind of person you are. You know, there's always going to be people who are really safety oriented, and then there's going to be people who like to bungee jump off of bridges. All of this is related to how you assess risk. And it also has to do with fear. Fear is such a huge effect on how people respond to things. And a lot of times it's counterintuitive. So for instance, the person who is unwilling to make social distance a practice and who wants to still see people and wants to still go out, what may be driving them is actually a fear of what they will do if they can't do it, if they can't socialize, something that may be driving them to think, if I don't see people, then I'll get depressed. And if I get depressed, then I'll go into a hole. And if I go into a hole, it'll be horrible. Okay, what they're not realizing is that their fear is what's causing them to do that. And that's not actually happening yet. Realizing, okay, I can manage this if I know what I'm afraid of. So being able to figure out what your responses are, and if that fear is keeping you or causing you to be distressed in a way that you don't quite understand. Taking it apart and kind of looking and saying, now, what am I actually afraid of here? What's actually driving my response one way or another? Or understanding the person you're with and realizing what fear is driving their response one way or another. And being able to realize that and get to the point where you realize, okay, yeah, I understand why they're afraid. I can deal with it or not, but understanding that it's not personal, it's not about me, it is about the fear that's driving them to do whatever they do. Another thing that is true all the time, but even more true now with this sort of extreme situation we're in, is to understand that you have a choice as to how you respond to something, to a situation. Let's go back to my conversation about fear. If you understand that your fear is driving you to relentlessly talk to people, relentlessly to text people, realizing, okay, this is me being scared of not having connection, of not being able to talk to people, of thinking that if I don't see them, then they won't love me anymore. I mean, part of what's important is to realize that your fears are not always going to be rational, you know? If you don't see people for a week, it doesn't mean that they don't love you anymore. It just means you haven't seen them for a week. But understanding, okay, I realize that's what I'm doing. Having the awareness of what's causing your behavior can then help you choose to deal with it or choose to manage it. So if you say, all right, I'm really driving people nuts with all the texting. I really understand that I don't have to talk to them or text them 5 times a day, or I don't have to post 20 times a day on my Instagram or whatever you're doing. Realize, okay, I'm going to make the choice to not do this. I'm going to make the choice to just post twice a day. Or I'm going to make the choice to only respond to people who I feel like are going to help me. I'm going to make the choice to be less judgmental of people that I know who I don't agree with in terms of how they're managing the quarantine. But understanding that once you have an awareness of what's going on, you can then choose how you manage the issue. If you don't really know, if you don't have an awareness, what happens is you tend to make a reaction or do a judgment that only makes things worse. So you're fighting blind in a way, or you're walking into a room without really knowing where all the furniture is. And then when you stub your toe, you yell and you get mad, as opposed to knowing, oh wait, no, I know there's a couch there, let me step to the right. Figuring out how to realize what's going on and then make a judgment call, understanding this is what they're doing, that's why. That choice is really helpful and empowering. One of the major systems that I work with in my practice is a way to manage stress. And for me, stress is a really big category. It is not just the fight, flight, or freeze that happens when you get out of the way of a bus, but it's the sort of stress that can be low grade, it can be ongoing, it can be in relationships, it can be in situations that you don't immediately think, oh, I need to fight, flight, or freeze, but there's something that causes you to be upset, that causes you to be anxious. Understanding how you manifest stress and then learning the countermeasures to that is the basis of this system that I use. And if you look at the handout, on the second side, where it talks about stress arousal, sympathetic nervous response, and parasympathetic nervous response, there are 6 types of stress, 3 physical and 3 mental. What becomes really important is for you to look at how you manifest stress. What happens? Are you someone who tends to get really tight? Do your muscles get tight? Are you someone who tends to sort of hold a pose or just sit still? Are you someone who has short breath? Do you get panic attacks where you get shortness of breath? Those are 3 physical symptoms that can all be managed in the moment. The most important one of those physical symptoms is breath, and understanding that taking long, deep breaths, long, slow, diaphragmatic breaths, is extremely helpful in changing your physiological state. One of the things that I was really fascinated by when I was studying all this was to learn that you can't be anxious and relaxed at the same time. Your body goes from one to the other. And the downside of this is that instead of being relaxed, what people do is end up being what we call tuned for stress. And so let's say you have a situation where it's an imaginary situation, but you have a 0 stress level. I don't know of anybody that's ever actually had this, particularly in our current day, but imagine someone has a 0 stress level and something happens and your stress level goes up to 20. So there you can see. So you start here, your stress level goes up to 20. And stress is an important thing because it gives us, it's a warning system. If something's happened, then we need to know and our body needs to be able to react. What is really the thing to be able to do is then go back down to 0. And that's where people have the problem. So you have a situation, you get stressed, stress level goes up to 20, and instead of going back to 0, it goes down to 5. And so your ongoing stress level, instead of being 0, is then 5. So the next time something stressful happens, you go up 20, and instead you go back down to 10, and 10 becomes your level. Over time, your baseline, instead of being 0, ends up at 30, 40, 50, and you're walking around in a stress state all the time. That can be really, really damaging to your body in all sorts of ways. The other side of the handout I gave you gives a whole range of how ongoing stress can harm the body. And the ability to lower your stress levels, not necessarily not get stressed, but to then go back to a manageable baseline is what is really important in learning to manage stress. So, okay, we have these physiological responses: muscle tension, holding a pose, breathing. The mental effects of stress are equally strong and often more common. So one thing that happens a lot is that people have what we call an autonomic response to stress. So the classic one is if you get stage fright, you get nauseous, or you get a headache, or you get a stomach ache. People will often have tension in their shoulders, they'll have back pain or whatever, and you realize, oh wait, my back tends to hurt when my aunt comes over. You know, it can be as directly related to that, or it can be an ongoing situation that you don't realize you're in is causing you stress. And understanding how your body is reacting physically to a mental situation or an intellectual understanding of something becomes important as well. Negative self-talk. This is something that I have not yet had a client not experience. Everyone has some little voice in their head, and I don't mean in a mental illness sort of way, but there's something that tells you you're not good enough, you can't do it. Why did you say that? You're never going to be able to get in that group. You're never going to be able to finish this. You always procrastinate. You're so lazy. You know, all of those things. Everybody's got something saying that in their heads. Understanding that when you start hearing that kind of stuff, what that really is a stress response. You don't feel that way. You don't hear that stuff when you're enjoying yourself, when you're relaxed, when you're happy. You hear oh, you're never going to be able to get there when you're tired, or when you're in a situation where you're panicked, or in a situation where someone is challenging you, or you are upset. Understanding that negative self-talk, however it manifests, is actually a stress response. It's not true. Is really, really key, because then you can kind of detach from it and you realize, oh wait, that's me doing that thing. There I am. I'm telling myself that, and it's only because I haven't eaten and I've been working for 20 hours straight, and oh right, no, I need to kind of relax and calm and take a rest, and then I will think about whether or not this is the way I should think or how I should feel or whatever. The last mental one that I want to talk about is about attention. One of the things about attention is that it can be either really, really focused on one extreme, or it can be open and attuned to a variety of perceptions. Now, everyone has different kinds of perception and different kinds of attention at different moments, but you can notice yourself if you're someone who on the negative end tends to be really hyper-focused on that negative thinking. And you tend to focus on the one thing and you can't let go of that thought, and you get into a spiral and you go down a hole, and that's negative focused thinking. On the other hand, negative open thinking is more like multitasking without ever achieving anything. So you find yourself doing 10 things at once and none of it makes sense, or nothing works. We also call that monkey mind. You kind of go doom, 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 doom. Realizing, okay, I tend to go one way or the other. What you then can do is train yourself to do the opposite. So if you're someone who tends to try and do 10 things at once and none of them work, what you want to work on is positively training yourself to focus on one thing. And that all of these things are going to take practice, but understanding that, oh, wait, I'm scattered so many places, I can't do things. Let me try and focus, learn to focus on the one thing. On the other hand, if you're someone who focuses on that one negative thought or on the one negative thing, and you find yourself going down a hole, you can open up your perception. You can look at the input of all of your senses. You can see that there are 10 things going on in the world and that all of them are interesting, and begin to open your perception rather than finding it sort of closed and focused. So there's a thing about therapy these days that is kind of ironic, and it is that therapists are stealing wholesale from the Buddhists. Buddhism has a whole variety of ways of thinking about the self, of thinking about anxiety, and thinking about how to manage the world. And the ways of learning to meditate, ways of learning to consider the world have been something that has become really, really helpful in therapy. So the 4 steps that I'm going to talk about they're going to seem really familiar because they come from Buddhist ideology and Buddhist training. The first of the 4 steps is the idea of being able to notice. You just are aware of, oh wait, this is me doing that thing. Oh wait, I can see that this is why that person is attacking me so. Or, oh yes, I understand now that this is the way I feel when I hear that the president has said yet something else, you know. Knowing what you're dealing with, understanding, having an awareness of yourself, of your responses, can be really, really helpful, because then you can look at them and you can analyze and understand. Why am I feeling that way? What is it about this particular thing that is triggering me? Or what is it about this one situation that I just can't handle? You understand, you begin to look at that and you say, oh, well, it's because XYZ. This particular step is the one that leans most towards therapy, because you get into a therapeutic situation and you begin to talk about things and you go, oh, right, well, that happened and that caused me to think this, and so that's why I have that, and so on. And so, yeah, that's why that happens. Now, sometimes there's not a rational explanation. There's not a linear sort of, oh, this happens to me, so then I think this way. A lot of times you just have to acknowledge, okay, the reason I'm feeling this way is not rational. It doesn't make any sense. I'm not going to let that be something that bothers me. Being able to understand what can be analyzed and what not, what you can change and what not, is also really important. Which takes us to our next step, which is self-compassion or non-judgmentalism. And it's interesting because everyone has a different one of these steps that they have the most trouble with given a different time. A lot of people are like, yeah, I get it. I know I do that thing. And oh yeah, I know why I do it, but I just beat myself up about it all the time. I just feel like if I could just not do that, it would be okay. And I'm so stupid that I keep doing that. Or, you know, letting go of figuring out why you do something, beating yourself up about it, is really, really important, because it's not helping anything. You have this sense of wanting to beat yourself up about something, but the beating yourself up is only keeping you from doing the thing you want to do. So you go through those stages, you notice, oh wait, yeah, it's me doing that thing. And I know why, or I've understood that it doesn't make any sense, but this is why I do it, and so there you are. You let it go. You say, I'm human, this is why I have these things, it's okay, I'm working on it. And then you do the thing you want to do. You either let the thought go, or you make the decision that you've been avoiding, or you do the behavior you want to do, or you don't do the behavior you don't want to do. But realize that once you get past those stages, you have the ability to then say, okay, here we are. This is what I want to let go or accomplish or whatever. Realizing that these 4 stages are, they're all sort of steps that you can work on. They're difficult in different ways for different people, but they're really handy. And if you can go through them and understand, you can get to a point of like, okay, I can handle this now. One of the things that makes this system helpful is that when people are in a panic or they're having trouble thinking, you go through your stress responses and you understand what it is that's keeping you from being able to handle anxiety or handle stress. And then once you get that to a state of manageability where you can say, okay, yeah, I can take a few breaths now, you can then begin to figure out how to handle it. But you can't do that unless you can get yourself to a state where you can think straight. And so that's what a lot of these steps and the 6 understandings, the 6 manifestations of stress and their countermeasures can help you do. If you look at the handout that I gave you, there's 4 sayings at the bottom of the page that are things that I came up with because I found myself saying them over and over again to people, and they're kind of handy. The first one is awareness is key. No matter what, if you're in therapy, if you're not, if you're trying to figure out how to live a better life, if you're trying to figure out what you need to do or make a decision, being aware of all the aspects of whatever that is going to be really important. And it's the difference between walking around in the dark and having an understanding or a room lit where you see where things are. Having the awareness, knowing what you are dealing with is really important. The second one is remember what you know. And the reason I put this in is because so many people have training in different types of disciplines. A lot of people have breath training. A lot of people have movement training. A lot of people have sensory training. Artists have learned to see and hear in different ways. Remembering that you have the ability to use your senses and your training that can help you manage your stress. And a lot of people don't realize that these things that you learn to play an instrument can also help you manage a panic attack. But knowing what you know and remembering to use it in different ways can be really helpful. So the third one, it kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier with relationship triage and understanding how to handle those sorts of situations, is that 2 things can be true at the same time. You can love your mother dearly and not want to talk to her during this time. You can really, really enjoy socializing with your roommates, but realize that no, right now I'm going to stay in my room. There's all sorts of things that are contradictory, but also true, and holding both of those things in at the same time and understanding that it's okay, that these things are both true and they're contradictory and you can live with them. This is something that's often, particularly in relationships, it's like, I love them, but I can't be with them. Both things are true. You have to deal with it. The last one is a little bit controversial, but I find it really important to think about sometime, and that is that nothing matters. In the grand scheme of things, there's very little that makes a difference. I mean, obviously it matters if you have a job and you have a roof over your head and those things and so on, but the things that we attach so much importance to, am I gonna get this grant? Am I gonna make the move? Do I go here or there or so on? Quite often, it really doesn't matter which way you go. Often there is no wrong decision. Very often, the thing that you're most concerned about is the thing that matters the least. And realizing that, oh yeah, okay, let me just step back a bit and realize, yeah, okay, I realize that I'm putting a lot of effort and fear and desire into that. And in the end, it kind of just really doesn't matter. One of the things that's been happening a lot lately is that people are making assessments after having lived for 6 weeks without a lot of things that they thought were absolutely necessary, and are realizing, I guess the world doesn't end if I don't get up and spend an hour making up in the mirror, or if I spend an hour a day working out in the gym, or, you know, whatever sort of personal thing you were doing, that you realize, oh, it's okay. The world doesn't fall apart if I don't do that. Putting things in perspective is a really excellent tonic, you might say, in managing all of this stuff. That's pretty much my talk. I would be happy to hear questions or comments from anyone. Or do you have any other comments or things you'd like to say? Please let me know.
Thank you, Alice. I've unmuted. Thank you very much for, as usual, guiding us through troubled waters. Get out the wellies and the boots.
I know, right? We're wading through this.
I've unmuted everyone that I can, but let's see, we've got one. Bless you. Does anyone have any questions?
Hiba, do you have a question?
Yeah, I was just gonna, the last part got kind of choppy for me because of my internet, but I was just, I just wondered if you could speak more about the idea of managing panic. You're talking a bit about panic attack, okay. So it's more of an open question.
Okay, sure. For a lot of people, panic manifests as an actual physical sensation. So you get shortness of breath, your heart rate goes up, your blood pressure goes up, and you begin to have that be a cascading effect. And one of the things I talk about on this other, the other side of the PDF, is that all those things are cascading physiological effects. And so in an immediate sense, what becomes really important is to notice, oh, wait, this is me going into panic mode. And I joke with people, I say, okay, so the thing to do when you realize that is to start doing deep breathing. The problem is there is nothing more difficult than doing deep breathing when you're in a panic state. It's just because it's sort of an on-off switch. It's kind of like trying to stop a freight train. Mm-hmm. The best solution is to catch it before it starts going too fast. But if you're in a state where you're really panicked, realizing, oh, wait, this is not the end of the world. I'm not going to die. This is a panic attack. And I can calm myself and breathe, and I'll be okay. So the things that you end up having to remember are that the fears that you're having, that you're going to die, that something is really bad, that this is never going to end, those are not true. Your body wants to think they're true. Your mind is convinced that they're true, but they're not true. You won't die. You can take a deep breath. And then you can get through that moment and try to figure out how to keep from getting there in the future. But figuring out in the moment, oh, wait, let me take deep diaphragmatic breaths. And figure out, okay, all right, I can get to the other side of this. That's the very immediate way to handle a panic attack. There are all sorts of other things that I can talk about in more detail if you wanted to give me a call, if you're someone that's having trouble. But understanding how you're manifesting the stress and what you can do to counteract that, which are all the things that I listed on the page. Learning to do that in the moment is the thing that the training helps you do. Does that answer? Is that kind of what you had in mind?
Yeah, I did. Thank you so much.
Okay, great.
Hello?
Terrence, how are you?
Fine, how are you? Thank you. I'm concerned about, once again, some of the social factors, considering all this that's been going on. I'm African American, and just the factors, considering that in terms of the higher rates, the environments we may live in, the lack of access, and just the whole separate social factors that may go along with that.
Mm-hmm.
in that environment.
So are you finding that you feel more at risk yourself than you would otherwise? Is that what you mean? Or are you in a situation where you can't avoid risk, or what's going on?
Yeah, kind of sort of from a whole lot of different perspectives,
Mm-hmm.
but mainly it's because of some pre-existing stuff that was happening even before the virus, this
Mm-hmm.
pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of compounded right now and it causes more stress.
Sure, sure. Well, as I mentioned, one of the things that's most important is to understand, okay, I am in a stressful situation right now, realizing that that is what's affecting you, as opposed to letting the stress manifest in things as you telling yourself negative thinking that then causes you to have more stress. Um, Realizing, okay, I'm in a difficult situation right now. What can I control? What can I not control? What do I have the ability to change? What can I not change? And then once you're able to think straight, if you've kind of gotten yourself to a relaxed or a calm place, you can then say, all right, this is how I'm going to live with this. This is how I'm going to manage this situation. This I can do, this I can do, this I can't do. This I can avoid, this I can't avoid. I have to accept and deal with it and understand that I'm only capable of so much. And you don't beat yourself up about what you can or can't do. You do the best of your ability. Unfortunately, this isn't landing equally on everyone, right? And you just have to kind of live with what your situation is in the moment.
Yeah, with Chicago having a reputation of being the or one of the most segregated cities in the U.S.,
Mm-hmm.
you know, um, I don't know. Maybe it seems like we're having this separated communication once again. How are we communicating? As far as cross culturally, across neighborhoods during this time. I mean, communication obviously is a challenge in general,
Mm-hmm.
but like this this meeting here, if you want to reach out and talk with someone, find out what's happening in their neighborhood,
Mm-hmm.
what are some of the challenges, how they're dealing with it, I
Mm-hmm.
think that maybe can sort of help,
Mm-hmm.
kind of have that communication some sort of way, that medium where you can talk with people and share your experiences from different neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm.
But if we already again have these pre-existing problems, and not saying there aren't some goods, in our city, you know, how do you deal with that challenge? I don't know if I'm making myself clear.
No, you are. And like you say, this is something that pre-existed the pandemic. Whatever your situation, if you are able to come to an understanding that, oh, I need to get help, or oh, I need to be able to understand this and face it. One of the things that becomes really important is to not let the situation that you're in become the only truth you know. So if you're in a situation where you are in a neighborhood or in an economic situation, what the world says about that is not your truth. And reminding yourself, okay, I may be in this situation now, but that's not what I am. That's not how I should judge myself, and I'm not going to accept the world's judgment of that. That becomes really important in situations where there are economic or cultural things that are causing a difference in the way you're being affected. Knowing that you understand how to help other people can let you then do that help. But if you fall prey to thinking, oh, well, I can never do this because this is how our city works, then you'll never do it. Being able to get past those assumptions of society to what it is you want to do, having your own agency, becomes really important.
I think Terrence is also addressing what we were talking about, Alice, with Rhonda, about the aspect of this experience being a petri dish. It's
Oh, absolutely.
in a magnifying lens. It's
Mm-hmm,
really
mm-hmm.
exacerbating and highlighting the things that maybe individuals and society didn't really ignore. And now you
Oh, no, I agree totally. And I think what my answer was trying to get across is that it is really important to be aware of all those things. It's important to understand you're in a petri dish. You understand that this is how the deck was stacked against you, however you want to describe that. But you have to figure out a way to live with it. And you have to figure out the way that's going to be the best for you to manage and keep your sanity. And figuring out what that is. What's the best way for me to manage where I am right now? How do I manifest stress and how do I deal with it? That's going to be true no matter who you are or where you are. I'm not saying that the stress is always going to be equal, but whatever it is, you still have to figure out how to live with it. And that's what I'm hoping that these systems can help you do.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Questions or comments about anything?
I had a question about, you mentioned a lot of these, the stress responses and the techniques are coming from, therapists are stealing wholesale from Buddhism. And I was just curious about your own experience and history with this. Are you coming from the therapeutic aspect, or have you, were you first a Buddhist, or has that sort of inspired your response to this? And if so, do you have any signposts you could give about like further reading or ways to incorporate these practices from either background?
Sure. I'm actually coming from a therapeutic aspect viewpoint. My background in the less than clinical side is more in yoga psychology and Hinduism being the precursor to Buddhism. So there are certain spiritual commonalities, but I was really fascinated when I was in my training at how many of the really major therapeutic theories that are being used now were based in Buddhist thought. And the people who created them were coming from a very strong Buddhist background. That being said, it's important to realize that these techniques are helpful, but you don't want to separate them from the reason they were in a religion in the first place, which is to understand that there are ethical boundaries using them. It's important to understand that they don't exist in a vacuum, and realizing that using mindfulness in a way that is not going to help other people as well as yourself is counterproductive. So it's definitely a double-edged sword. I'm the first to acknowledge. A lot of people, when I present these like the 4 stages or whatever, they'll say, "Oh, well, that's mindfulness." I'm like, "Yeah, I own it. That's it." And it's a really big question. So I just like to acknowledge it straight right in the beginning. But no, I don't have a Buddhist background.
And then I just also had a follow-up question about, it seems like all of these techniques, the thing that gets me the worst or the hardest thing is just the recognizing, the being aware.
Yeah, noticing, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like, before this whole Petri dish situation happened, I had a regular meditation kind of relaxation practice, but now my routine is totally gone. I find that hard to sort of get back in. I'm so out of that routine that I can't catch it in time. And it's just a big mess.
Right. Well, one of the things I want to make a point to say is that you don't want to beat yourself up for that having happened. You're certainly not alone. It was interesting. I can look at the comments I would have from my clients. The first few weeks, it was like, "Oh, I'm having this trouble with the relationship," or "Oh, I'm this." And then the past couple of weeks, it's been, "Oh, I seem to be just walking around in a daze," or "Oh, I'm just really distracted or disassociated." And I just, and it seems to be a common theme of about week 5, week 4, week 5, week 6, people just lost the thread. And that's okay. It's understandable. If you realize, okay, this is when I have to really focus on focusing, or this is when I need to say, all right, what can I do? Maybe I can't do a regular meditation practice the way I had before, but I can remind myself to sit and breathe for 5 minutes before I go to sleep, or you can link it to something else as opposed to having it be a certain time of the day. Come up with some way, if you feel like it would help you, to do whatever you can and not beat yourself up about doing what you did before, or what you think you're supposed to be doing. Should is a bad word right now. Is that kind of what you had in mind, or?
It is, yeah. I
Okay.
feel like I wish I'd have done more of this, because, you know, it's easier to stop the freight train, like you were talking about, before it takes off the rails and goes nuts and nuts.
Yeah, well, you know, best laid plans, right? You do what you can. Anybody
Yeah.
else have a question or comment or anything? Or?
I have one more thing.
Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
You know, you said something very interesting earlier in terms of how this time has made many of us question, you know, our Western or American way of life and that kind of
Sure.
thing. You know, one thing I thought about is, if I really contemplate about this and make changes in my life, and maybe this is something I shouldn't worry about, but it's just a thought. You reminded me of this when you said that. Hypothetically, when we go back to our normal life, I know I'm contradicting myself, whatever normal is,
Yeah, exactly.
how can I relate to people in a different way who have not chosen to change? I can't
Right.
control that, but people who might
Yeah.
say, hey,
Yeah.
I'm back in the party again. And he's
Yeah.
like, no, I don't want to be there anymore.
Yeah, well, you know what? That's also something that was going to be the same issue before this all happened. And that's just something you have to acknowledge. You're like, okay, you're on a different path than me. Cool. I don't want to judge you for being on a different path. I'm not going to say you should do this, you shouldn't do that. But you have the strength of self-understanding to say, yeah, this has been where the paths diverge, and I'm going this way, you're going that way. Cool, see ya.
And I'm only interrupt one moment. I meant that more so. Maybe I should have been more specific. I meant that more so in a professional environment.
Absolutely,
In terms of how
the same thing applies.
Yeah.
You have to let people go. You can't assume that because you've chosen something, they're going to choose it. You can't judge them for not choosing it, just as you don't want them to judge you for not going the path they go, whether it's personal, professional, or whatever. You can certainly explain, but you can't expect. You can't expect them to necessarily follow where you're going to go or what you're going to do. Everyone comes to it in their own time, whatever it might be. That's one of the hard things to let go of, because you feel like, I've made this choice. I worked so hard at doing it. It must be right. I have to convince everybody else. All of that is true except the last sentence. You don't have to convince anybody else. You do your own thing. You go your own way. You do your own work. And other people make their own choices. In work and in life.
Thank you very much. That was amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm glad you all came and hung out with us this afternoon on this rainy afternoon.
Yeah, and if you want to join also, we'll be having these every Wednesdays. So also next Wednesday is Rhonda Wheatley, and I think, we're not exactly sure, but we don't know how long this is going to happen. But also in answer to just a follow up on Terrence's question about how we come out, we're organizing a show called Windows to the World, in our windows, to really address that question. Well, how do we want to see the world when we come out? I know it's fraught with like forcing people to actually do stuff during this time period, but we almost kind of, in some ways, how are we going to prepare ourselves for, do we want to see the world, like you said, Terrence, like, are we going to change? Is the world going to change? Is just me going to change? Or is, and what can we leave behind, like Alice said?
Your changing can change the world. You just can't expect it to change on your time frame or in the way you want it to. But what you do does affect other people.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good afternoon.
Thank you. Yeah. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.